So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning. This is Friday Morning on GB News with me, Esther McVeigh, and Philip Davis on your TV, radio and online.
Good morning, we're with you until midday today. We've got a jam-packed show to get you in the mood for the weekend. We'll be talking through all the latest political news, developments and gossip, and asking how big a problem is class discrimination in the UK.
Make sure you get in touch with your views, as usual, on GB Views at gbnews.uk. We'll be getting to those throughout the show. But first, it's time for the latest news with Rhiannon.
Esther, thank you. Good morning. It's 2 minutes past 10. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Chancellor is flying back to the UK a day early amid speculation the government's about to do a U-turn on its economic plans. Kwasi Kwarteng was due to attend a final day of meetings at the IMF's annual gathering in the US today. His return comes as the Prime Minister is expected to scrap parts of the mini-budget in the coming days as pressure mounts on the government to reassure the markets. The pledge to end the planned 6% rise in corporation tax is widely seen as a likely casualty as Liz Truss seeks to save her premiership. Speaking to GB News, Trade Minister Greg Hands played down speculation.
I don't believe an announcement is coming, but what I do know is that in just 2 weeks' time, the government will be laying out its medium-term fiscal plan. Kwasi Kwarteng as Chancellor of the Exchequer in the House of Commons with a full forecast and report from the Office for Budget Responsibility in the proper way, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
Well, speaking to GB News earlier, Professor of Economics Jonathan Ports argued the mini-budget was never going to be plausible.
It would be very difficult to come up with a worse plan for managing the economy than they have done so far, in my view. Because not only was the plan a bad one, but the way that they have handled it, the way they've presented it to the markets by sort of, and to the public indeed, by saying, oh, we're going to tear up the old orthodoxy, and that's going to generate growth, which will pay for these large tax cuts. That was never plausible.
Royal Mail says it's planning to make up to 6,000 people redundant by next August. That's after announcing losses of more than £200 million. The company says it started notifying workers of its plan, which aims to reduce its overall headcount by a total of 10,000. The majority of the cuts will be made through redundancy, while the rest will be through what they call natural attrition. Royal Mail expects its full-year losses to hit £350 million. Labour has pledged to try and ban fracking once and for all, calling it an unjust charter for earthquakes. The opposition plans to work cross-party with all MPs that oppose the controversial gas extraction method. The government's decision to lift the fracking ban in England has been scrutinised in recent weeks. It had been in place since 2019 following a series of earth tremors. Shadow Climate Secretary Ed Miliband says his party will oppose the Conservatives' dodgy plans to impose expensive, dirty and dangerous fracking on the British people. The US House of Representatives Committee has voted unanimously to subpoena Donald Trump in its Capitol riots investigation. The former president will now have to give evidence to the committee about the events of the 6th of January last year, which saw 5 people killed. If he doesn't, he could face imprisonment. The committee argues Mr. Trump was directly involved in the bid to overturn the 2020 US election result. He denies the accusations. Speaking to GB News, Professor David Dunn said the subpoena could go one of 2 ways.
Now, as far as the Democrats are concerned, what they hope is that the theatre of Trump sitting there actually reminds people of his criminality. But of course, it's entirely possible that it could go the other way, and actually that Trump portrays himself and is portrayed by his supporting media and the Republican Party as some sort of martyr, and that mobilizes the Republican Party's base to come out in the midterms and support him further in becoming the candidate for president in 2024.
And the government says it's unlocked £100 million worth of export markets within the alcohol industry. The International Trade Department says it's ended a number of barriers, including with African and South American nations. In Argentina, for example, where whisky tariffs were reduced from 35% to 20% following talks. This is GB News, bringing more as it happens now, though. It's back to Esther and Philip.
Well, good morning. This is Friday morning on GB News with me, Esther Midday, and Philip Davis. I said Davis then. I should know why Davis. Is that what I was thinking? Absolutely. On your TV, radio and online. We've got a great show lined up for you to start your day. So here's what's coming up this morning.
Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng cut short his trip to the United States. Is the rapid dash home a sign of a possible U-turn on the controversial mini-budget?
Many people are worried about what all this economic and political turbulence means for their pensions. We'll be speaking to pensions expert Steve Webb in more detail about that.
And is class discrimination a problem in 21st century Britain? Are people looked down on because of how they sound? And what barriers hold back working class people? We've got a lively discussion later in the show.
Yes, we have all of that coming up and much more across the programme, and you can get in touch with your views as usual, and that's gbviews@gbnews.uk. Email us.
Before all of that, though, we're delighted to be joined in the studio by the former Conservative advisor and commentator, Claire Purcell. Claire, what's caught your eye in the papers?
Well, I thought we would perhaps start with not quite the front pages, but some other stories and a little bit of joy, which is the blood donation problem that the NHS is having at the moment. We were on an amber alert for a lack of blood supplies, but nearly 10,000 Brits have signed up to become donors, which just, I think, goes to show you the strength of feeling the British people have and how good we are at coming together in a crisis. The only problem is there aren't enough staff to take the blood and look after them with a cup of tea and a biscuit after they've donated. So I think the new health secretary needs to be on that case. But I just think it's a real indictment of how good the British people are in things like this, which, opposed to the Just Stop Oil, which you mentioned, protesters blocking roads and stopping people getting disabled children to school and ambulances coming across. So I think, this shows the two sides of Britain at the moment. And sort of moving on to another sort of woke story, which will anger people. Convicts get to choose who will be hired as their wardens. And I think
this April the 1st. Let's just check the date, shall we?
It does feel a little bit like it. It's a jail in Sutton in Surrey, which holds 1,200 adult male prisoners, and they'll be given a choice. So it now looks like Justice Secretary Brandon Lewis is being asked to intervene to stop this, and quite rightly so. I don't see how we can allow that one to run through. You get to choose who looks after you on a daily basis when you're in prison.
It's this sort of thing, though, that gets people really furious.
Yeah.
We're reading at the time in the papers. In fact, I've stopped reading some of them because I find them so distressing and depressing. The violence, the attacks, the deaths, people, whether it's chopping people's hands off with a machete, whether it's people killing young children in neonatal wards. And we're finding out now these people are going to choose how they spend their time in prison and who is the warden. I mean, it just makes people's blood boil. We don't want that. We want people who've committed a crime at whatever level to serve their sentence and serve it in a way that we've got discipline, we've got respect, they know they can't do it, and it isn't a cushy number in prison. I mean, that just... you've
on one. I'm going to... papers, I think they're on day 14 or something of their protest, these absolute lunatics sitting in the road, gluing themselves to the road and whatever. But the thing that really gets me is that I actually walked out of Parliament the other day onto the street.
You didn't actually walk out as in he went to leave to go somewhere else.
I was going somewhere else, and I went out of the gates at Parliament, and there was absolute carnage going on around Parliament Square. and there were these, I don't know, a dozen lunatics who'd glued themselves to the road around Parliament Square. And that was bad enough, right? That was bad enough. That was bad enough to get me going. But the thing that really got me going is, I'm not joking, there must have been a minimum of 100 police officers around Parliament Square, stood looking at them and cordoning off the roads, cordoning off the pavements, while they literally just sat there looking at them. And look, I've always been a massive supporter of the police.
Philip obviously let it be known that he was unhappy with 100 police standing round doing nothing, didn't you, Phil?
I did. I've always been a massive supporter of the police, massive supporter of the police. But even I'm finding it difficult to support the police on occasions. And this was one. And I did go up to a few police officers and say, you know, would you mind actually, you know, would you mind, I felt like Sergeant Wilson off Dad's Army, you know, would you mind awfully, instead of just standing there, looking at all of this, go and arrest these people and get the road open. And it really depresses
me. It actually made the situation, and I'll bring in David Maddox here. Obviously, he'll be with us throughout the show. He's joining us as our presenter's friend, and he's a political editor of The Express Online. I'll bring you in here because the police made the situation worse.
They did for me. They certainly did for me.
Because it made it a bigger spectacle. You've got police cars, you've got motorbikes, you've got vans, you've cornered everywhere off. You've then got all the visitors, the tourists in London, everybody else going about the daily business, can't go about it, or just stood, staring, which then spreads all the chaos off the road. Do you remember, I think it was Boris Johnson, if you remember that chap, didn't he want a water cannon? Would that not just have been the ideal time to sort of melt the glue and sweep them off the pavements and the road?
I think it'd have been the perfect time to do that, actually. I think this is very serious, actually, because I've got a feeling, you know, one shouldn't rely too much on social media for one's views, but I've got a feeling that we are on the point of actually losing control of the situation, because what we're seeing now is the public losing confidence in the police and actually taking action themselves. And at the moment, it's just dragging people out of the roads. But it's not going to be long before it gets worse than that. And, you know, I think, you know, obviously the Chancellor's having his problems at the moment, but outside the Treasury, the Home Office is the department which is just inundated with nightmares. So are you saying some sort of vigilantism is going to take to the streets? We will see, which we've seen before. They go in then in uniforms, take law into their own hands.
It does feel a little bit like that. It feels that sort of civil unrest is not very far away. And I think when you see the police officers, as you say, chatting to protesters, giving them a cup of tea, making sure they're OK, when the streets of London or motorways in the United Kingdom are blocked, I think people will look at the police and say, well, what are you for? We're going to take this into our own hands because nothing is being done. You're not solving burglaries. You're not looking at sexual offences properly and violence against women. We're going to take this into our own hands. And I think that's where the real problem is going to come, is that we're going to be in this position then where mob rule will take over.
One of the points I made to the police officers, and I said, I bet if a member of the public came along and started removing them, I bet you'd go and arrest them for doing that. You know, I bet.
Well, you're checking out first for yourself. Yeah, you're saying, if I did it, would I get arrested?
They were probably stood there to protect the protesters from the members of the public. I mean, I've never seen anything so ludicrous in my life.
But this is, of course, why the protesters have people there filming the whole thing with cameras, so they can get other people arrested who try and take action to stop them. So, yeah, you're absolutely right.
But when the sense of unfairness is unleashed on the public, it goes back to what Claire says then, people taking the law into the hand as sort of a mob rule. Well, if you can't do it for us, we will do it for ourselves. So you had, as you said, disabled children couldn't get to school. You have, you know, ambulances not being able to take, you know, a sick person to hospital. And then people say, you know what, we've heard your cause. My goodness, we've heard it loud and clear. We don't want to hear it anymore. We've got other things to do.
Have you got something to calm my blood pressure down?
I don't. It might calm yours down. It might not calm Claire's down, because I was trying to look through the papers for other things, and I write in the Express. It was something I chose from looking around at surveys all week, and it was the Girls' Day School Trust had done a survey of girls in private and state schools. So the next generation of girls, what did they want to do? And it seems that, you know, all of those years of fighting to the top, smashing that glass ceiling, working extra hours, elbowing your way, networking, the next generation don't want to do it. So all those ladies who paved the way, done the heavy lifting, they're not. They're now saying we want a job that, we think sort of adds sort of social value, but we want to go back to sort of the family, sort of being at home. Domesticity is the way forward, Claire.
Oh, you see, that makes me quite angry. As somebody who was, state educated.
Philip, calm down. I've got Claire nice and angry.
I'll take over. I just find this so fundamentally disappointing. I'm state school educated. I had to pretty much sort of fight my way through. Wasn't naturally academic, but I had to make a real effort to do this, and always was told to work hard and you will achieve and you will have a house, a car, a good job. And I wanted everything. And I fought for it. And to feel that people aren't quite, especially women, who aren't quite there and will settle for something, I think that's what angers me more. Why would you settle? I think if they're happy...
Yeah.
It's choice.
It is choice, and everybody should have that choice. But it just feels a little bit like they're taking a subservient position because it's slightly easier, and that's the bit that really worries me.
Because, I mean, if I was just going to play devil's advocate and say, look, I thought...
Oh, there's a surprise.
I thought feminism was all about saying to women that you can achieve whatever you want to achieve. You can do whatever you want to do. And it's not, and if that's what they want to do, then that's what they want to do.
But
they don't have to do what other people think they should do.
And I get that, because I totally believe in choice. And I've got a myriad of friends, some who did excellently well at university, but they chose to not go to the executive boardroom. They set up a business, but they were still doing stuff, but they changed it around. So I believe in choice. But it does feel, if you're taking an easier path, that somebody else can do the graft and do the financial graft. It does feel as if we paved the way, that I'm now going to be lying in. How about, though, people say the cost of living's changed everything, and the best thing you can do is buddy up to share the bills. The best thing you can do is, because childcare costs are so expensive, what's the point of working all those hours to fork it out on somebody else? Are they just not being super savvy and pragmatic, that why should we do that? There's a better way of making our money go further.
Possibly, but I still, again, find that goes against everything that I was brought up to believe in, that you worked hard, you weren't given things. And I spent 9 years as a single parent, and the money that I had after all of my bills were taken into account was £20 a month. That's all I had left over.
Wow.
After childcare and coming into work and all the rest of it. And it was really hard. And my son was born under a Labour administration, and that administration was throwing money at me to stay at home. But I didn't want it, because I'd been brought up with a work ethic. You must go, you must do these things. It might be hard, but you have to do it. So I did, and I fought through, and it was really, really hard. But I'm so glad that I did it, because the resilience I think it teaches me and my son was enormous, and you can't put a price on that.
And I always say, don't be beholden on somebody else, because if that stopped, that support, you're left on your own, and it's very difficult. So I always say, make sure you've got a totally separate bank account that nobody else knows about.
So
anyway, Philip.
I have to. Claire, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
And David, you'll be with us as well throughout the programme, and you'll be back a little bit later on, Claire. But after the break, many of you are worried about what impact the political and economic turmoil will have on your pensions. Well, we'll be joined by a former pensions minister to try and make sense of some of the things that are going on. He is a definitive pension expert. See you soon.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. It's now 10:22. Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng cuts his trip to the United States short for crucial discussions with the Prime Minister Liz Truss.
As turbulence continues across the global financial markets, a mini-budget U-turn looks to be on the cards. Many of you, our viewers and listeners, are concerned about what impact the economic turmoil and confusion could have on your savings and, in particular, pensions.
Here to talk about this in some detail is Steve Webb, former Pensions Minister and a definitive voice on pensions. Thank you so much for joining us, Steve. Well, look, I know you will have been following this incredibly closely, particularly in today's papers. Is there going to be further U-turns of that mini-budget? So I guess my first question to you is, any U-turns, would that be helpful to the pensions industry, market, and obviously our viewers?
I think it would, and indeed the worst of all worlds would be if the rumours that we've had about a U-turn were then squashed. I mean, almost the worst possible thing would be if Kwasi Kwarteng gets off the plane, stands on the tarmac and says, I stick by my mini-budget. That would cause chaos. Because what we've actually seen in the markets is now that this is widely expected, now it looks as though the government won't be borrowing so much money to pay for tax cuts. Interest rates actually eased off a bit, and that meant that the pension funds that have been under some strain actually have a bit more leeway. So there are various things that will protect the pensions we would perhaps talk about, but certainly I think the only thing we need to worry about today in terms of the political movements would be any reversal of the rumour of the planned U-turn, if you follow me.
Steve, I guess many people will be wanting to know, why have pension funds got themselves into such a precarious position in the first place, and how likely possible is it that a pension fund could collapse? That'll be what will be keeping many people awake at night.
Sure, and I don't think a pension fund will collapse. I mean, it's worth saying that these funds between them have got £2 trillion worth of assets. They're not broke, they're not bust, they were short of cash. It's a bit like you or I getting a tax demand. We don't have the money in our current account for it. So what would we do? We'd perhaps raid our savings, access something that needed 30 days notice. It's that kind of thing. It was a liquidity issue, which has required them to sell some assets and so on. But you ask a good question, how did this happen in the first place? We expect when we invest to take an element of risk. You could put it under the mattress, you put it in your current account, get no return, take no risk. Any investment has an element of risk, but it needs to be sensible and proportionate. And so when pension funds borrowed money to try and de-risk, funnily enough, to reduce their exposure to interest rate changes and so on, they tested how sensitive this would be if rates went up a bit, quite a bit. Nobody foresaw the bank and the government almost in cahoots to trash the gilts market. It was just beyond the realms of anything anybody could reasonably have been expected to plan for. But even with that, these pensions are safe. As I say, there's the billions or trillions in them, and there are companies standing behind them. If you work for a supermarket, you're in a supermarket pension scheme, the supermarket is there to stand behind the pension scheme as well.
The Governor of the Bank of England has said, now is the time, today is the day, get your affairs in order because the government won't be buying any more bonds off you. Do you think he might reverse on that? Because some people are saying he needs to continue. You haven't given us enough time. What do you think's going to happen there?
I don't think they'll reverse that specific policy, which was the buying back of gilts. Frankly, in the first place, I think it should have run to the 31st of October. There was always going to be this limbo period otherwise of a fortnight between what happens today and the planned fiscal statement. So I think it was a mistake to time limit it so tightly. But I think Andrew Bailey will have got away with it, ironically, because of the fiscal movement at the government end. If the government hadn't moved, if rates had stayed high and possibly gone higher, we could have had a real problem for pension schemes today. So I don't think, I mean, if things do go pear-shaped later today, the bank are not going to sit on their hands. They're not going to just watch while Rome burns. There are other ways they can get money into the market. So I think the bank are all over this today. They're not sort of saying, well, we're shutting up shop, you're on your own.
I'm thinking it from what, our viewers' point of view. When they're hearing all this, what do we do? What are we best to do with our pensions? Have you got advice to them if they think, oh, should we pull it out of here and move it there? How do we get the best for our pensions? What would you say?
Sure. Well, a couple of things to think about. First of all, that there are, as you well know, Esther, two main sorts of pension. The pensions we're talking about today are these traditional final salary defined benefit pensions. These are the ones with the £2 trillion in. I believe they're safe. I can't see any reason why people should worry about them. I mean, of course, the headlines are horrible. That's what's going on under the bonnet. But as I say, the assets are there. The companies are there standing behind them. I don't think there's any need to take any action there. Funnily enough, ironically, the people who've been hit are the people who have the more modern, what's called defined contribution or pot of money pensions, all those millions of people who've been automatically enrolled mainly into that sort of pension. They're the ones who've suffered this year. They've seen the stock market go down, so their shares have gone down. The bond markets go down, so their gilts and bonds have gone down. I get letters from people who say, look, my life savings have gone down 30% this year. I can't afford to retire, or I'm in retirement trying to manage a pot of money. It's gone down. And there are no quick fixes for those people. The one thing I would say is individual investors tend to panic. The markets go down and their instinct is to sell, whereas the professional investor tries to buy at the bottom of the market when everybody else is selling. And the one thing to just be careful of is a knee-jerk reaction. Because your money's gone down, it's so tempting to think, oh, I've just got to stop this, to sell up and stop it going any further. But that locks in your losses and means you miss out on a rebound. And if I may just give you one example, when lockdown happened, the stock market tumbled. And within about 3 or 4 days, it was more or less recovered. And anyone who sold the day after it tumbled would have just lost a lot of money. So trying to avoid, if possible, these kind of knee-jerk reactions would be the key.
Steve Webb, thank you so much indeed for joining us today. Thank you.
And Steve was probably in the coalition government. He was a Lib Dem MP, a Lib Dem minister in the Department of Work and Pensions. And he probably was the most effective member of that.
And he has done this job for many a year, all the time in shadow, then in government, and then he does it now in the industry. So that's why I said when I said we were bringing you one of the country's definitive experts in pensions, he was the guy. I meant it.
Yeah,
so David Maddox, we're back with you. What did you think of what Steve was saying there? U-turns, maybe you'll have to carry on with that. You can't keep changing your mind.
Yesterday it was being called the mother of all U-turns. I mean, it looks inevitable now, but the political damage of it will be immense for Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. I'd be surprised if Kwasi Kwarteng survives in his job.
Really?
In effect, cancelling that corporation tax rise was the centrepiece, really, of the growth strategy, because if you have a 6% as rise as it would be, you're going to stop businesses coming and investing here. You're going to stop businesses employing more people. You're going to actually see businesses leave the country. But they now seem to be in a position, as Steve was rightly saying, that they've got no choice.
And when you see a headline on one of the front pages, it's over here, I think it was, is that the Telegraph, Phil? Kwasi insists that he isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
When you see that...
Just as he got on a plane.
Yeah, just as he got...
Yes.
You, as a political editor, when you read that, what do you read in between the lines?
Well, if I was a football journalist, it would be the equivalent of a vote of confidence in the manager. It's that they've got a week to go when you hear that. And something's got to give. I mean, we're seeing on the front pages already talks about replacements for Liz Truss. Is it Rishi Sunak? Is it Penny Mordaunt? Is it, Ben Wallace? So this is certainly in Parliament yesterday. All your colleagues were discussing who, rather than whether, Liz Truss was going to be replaced. So
David, we will be speaking to you throughout the programme because I know, David's somebody, you're like a priest. People come to you like a confessional and he knows everything what's going on in Parliament. So we want to hear some of those stories a little bit later on. But after the break, is class discrimination still rife in the United Kingdom? Are people looked down on because of how they sound? And why are some people pretending to be more working class than they actually are?
That's after these headlines with Rhiannon.
Philip, thank you. Good morning. It's 10:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Chancellor is flying back to the UK a day early amid speculation the government's about to do a U-turn on its economic plans. Kwasi Kwarteng was due to attend a final day of meetings at the IMF's annual gathering in the US today. His return comes as the Prime Minister is expected to scrap parts of the mini-budget in the coming days as pressure mounts on the government to reassure the markets. The pledge to end the planned 6% rise in corporation tax is widely seen as a likely casualty as Liz Truss seeks to save her premiership. Speaking to GB News, Trade Minister Greg Hands played down speculation.
I don't believe an announcement is coming, but what I do know is that in just 2 weeks' time, the government will be laying out its medium-term fiscal plan. Kwasi Kwarteng as Chancellor of the Exchequer in the House of Commons with a full forecast and report from the Office for Budget Responsibility in the proper way, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
Royal Mail says it's planning to make up to 6,000 people redundant by next August after announcing losses of more than £200 million. The company says it started notifying workers of its plan, which aims to reduce its overall headcount by a total of 10,000. The majority of the cuts will be made through redundancy, while the rest will be through what they call natural attrition. And in the US, 5 people, including an off-duty police officer, have been shot dead in North Carolina. The shooting happened in Raleigh near a popular trail that runs through part of the city. At least 2 other people, including another police officer, were wounded and taken to hospital. Police say a suspect has been arrested. The motive for the attack is not yet known. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1269 and €1.1565. The price of gold is £1,472 and 2 pence per ounce. The FTSE 100's at 6,898 points.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to the show. Lots of you have been getting in touch already this morning. Esther?
I've got, hi Esther and Phil. We absolutely will have public unrest soon if the police don't do their job, because we were talking about the police observing rather than moving these Stop the Oil protesters on, and that was Darryl there.
And Pamela says, totally agree with Esther and Philip. The police are crazy for not removing these people. They are losing respect.
And good morning. I can only think that the lawyers are waiting in the wings. We must look at the legal position. Why else would the police not act? Just a thought. That's Shirley. And we always say that. There's always somebody trying to take a case against somebody.
And Hunter says, how come the police are so nice to these people blocking the roads? I bet if the same people were sat there wearing an England football shirt or carrying an England flag, it would be dogs and batons. It's just disgraceful. So quite a lot of opinions coming through about that. Keep them coming in. Now, class background is a barrier to opportunities in life, even among those who go on to develop successful careers. That's according to new research by the University of York.
But is class as significant a barrier to success as it once was? Today, you even get some people trying to pretend they're even more working class than they actually are. In fact, one candidate seeking selection as a Labour candidate in Sedgefield tried to ham up his working class credentials by boasting about his great-grandfather being a coal miner.
So how big a problem is class discrimination in 2022? Joining us to discuss this are Liz Brewer, behaviour and etiquette expert, and Dr Rakib Ehsan, a social policy analyst. Thank you both indeed for joining us. Liz, to start with you, is it still the case that people look down on people for how they sound and how they talk and where they're from?
I think absolutely not. You know, we live in a world today where if somebody's got ambition, and they take the trouble to actually get out of bed in the morning and do something, they have every opportunity to get from there to wherever they want to go. It's education and it's actually having ambition. You know, people that keep complaining are those that really should be spending time directing themselves as to what they really wanted to achieve. And you get fed up with people saying, oh, you know, it's to do with your accent. It's to do with which school you went to. It's to do with who your father was. Not in today's world. We've sort of leveled up. If you've got the ambition and if you've got the determination to get there, again, it is very much who you know, but who you know is where you put yourself,
but you do. But you do know better people in higher positions in society if you are of a different class or a different order.
Not necessarily. A lot of people around you could be those inherited wealth that aren't doing anything. You can actually jump over them and get forward. In today's world, you're recognised for your worth, for what you achieve in life. Who you are, what you're giving.
Let's bring in Rakib. Rakib, what do you make of what Liz has just said? Do you agree with her that actually it doesn't matter anymore about where people are from and how they sound?
It's a really good point when we're talking about social networks. I come from quite a traditionally working class community in Luton, and I would actually say that I was very well connected. I lived with people in my community who cared about my progress at school, college, university. We have civic assets in our community which provide a strong sense of belonging and rootedness. And that might not necessarily be the case in middle class neighbourhoods, maybe economically affluent, but may not have those kind of civic assets. Of course, I do think that there are some forms of class discrimination. I actually think that came through after the Brexit vote, where I felt there was a great deal of sneering towards traditional working class communities who traditionally voted Labour but voted to leave the European Union. I think there's a great deal of class-based progressive sneering towards those kind of communities. I think more generally in our politics, I think that you have what I would consider to be a middle class progressive layer within the Labour Party, which criticises the sort of high Tory upper class traditionalists, and working class Tories in that sense. So I do think that people should focus more on politics and policy as opposed to focusing on people's class backgrounds.
Do you think as well, though, this topsy-turvy world that now people are trying to ham up, as we were talking, their working class credentials, because that gives them authenticity, that shows they have strived. Did you think it works both ways? And people maybe who have been to Eton, who are well connected, people are saying, well, we don't want to offer you any more opportunities, you've had enough.
Well, I'd say that Britain fares very well when it comes to equality of opportunity. While there is more room for improvement in terms of fostering a more meritocratic society, I do think that we have a very high level of equality of opportunity in our country. The case you're referring to, Esther, was Alan Strickland, I believe, who's the Labour parliamentary candidate for Sedgefield. I just found it to be such a shame that he just couldn't focus on traditional working class concerns, whether it's education, employment, apprenticeships, as opposed to spending time talking about the background of those generations ago within his own family.
Liz, I was when you said that you know it doesn't really matter. I just wondered. I was thinking about all these people who have elocution lessons. Are they throwing their money away then? If it doesn't make any difference and people don't make any judgments anymore, are all those people having them? And would you say to people that you shouldn't be having elocution lessons? It's a waste of money.
You have to be understood. And to be able to be understood, you have to be able to articulate your words. If you swallow your words, or if you've got a very accentuated accent, you're at a disadvantage. If I can't understand what you're saying, then I won't be hearing what you're saying. And therefore, if somebody wants to have elocution lessons in order to be able to articulate what they're thinking, what they wish to portray to you, fair enough.
But you do make a judgment then. Judgments are made, aren't they? Whether we like it or not,
no, it's
about
not
the way
judgment.
you speak.
No, it's not a judgment.
Well, what is it then?
It's a question of being understood. And people are at an advantage with some of our accents. I love accents. My car, I've got an Irish accent telling me which direction to go. I love an Irish accent. So, you know, accents are wonderful. We have a country full of different accents. Nothing wrong with accents.
We agree.
It's a question of...
Funnily enough.
It's a question of being understood. And being understood, you articulate your words. You speak extremely well. You know, I articulate my words. It's what I was brought up with. I can't speak any other way. And if somebody wants to better themselves and if they feel they need elocution lessons, so be it. It may add to their self-esteem.
Liz, Rakib, thank you very much indeed, both of you, for joining us about that. I've just got to say, I've got to point this out, that I was actually castigated by a fellow Member of Parliament who you might say was from a higher social echelon from me, because I pronounced Ascot as Ascot rather than Ascot.
Well, I say Ascot.
Oh, Ascot?
Yes, I was absolutely castigated.
How are you saying it?
Well, to be fair...
Ascot, I would say Ascot.
And this debate came about today because tomorrow we're doing a big interview with John Bercow, the former Leader of the House, and Speaker of the House, and he got told that he was an oink, and he thought that there was still class division, there was still snobbery in politics and all forms of society. So I was just asking that. I wonder if there's so many tribes now, is it more about whether you're politically correct, not politically correct, whether you're net zero, not net zero?
Does it matter?
Class? Does it matter?
I think it was...
Isn't it what you put into life, what you achieve in life?
I agree.
Who you help in life, isn't that more important?
I think it was the same person who called John Bercow an oik that castigated me for pronouncing Ascot wrong. So,
we say out that person.
Anyway, back to our top story of politics. The media is full of speculation and hearsay about the future of both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor.
Let's try and find out what the latest is in the developing story. So we're joined by our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, what are the government telling you that the Whip's office aren't telling us?
Well, it has to be said that there is a bit of stonewalling going on right now. And why is that? Well, for one reason only. That is, the Chancellor is currently somewhere between 20 and 40,000 feet in mid-air, hovering over Oxfordshire. The last time I checked, and most political journalists have been fixated to what's called Flight Radar 24, following the path of the Chancellor's plane back from that summit in Washington, D.C. Well, he flew overnight. He abandoned that summit a day or two early. We were expecting him to come back on Sunday. Instead, it's Friday morning and his plane is just about to touch down at Heathrow. There was a rather comedic moment where the plane actually seemed to do a bit of a U-turn as it's waiting to land in one of those only 2 runways that our largest airport has. But no, clearly what is going to be happening over the next few hours is the Chancellor needs to actually land in his plane. He'll hurtle across to Downing Street and there will be some fairly frantic meetings between himself and the Prime Minister, although it must be said the markets and indeed most political journalists have settled on this view that the decision has already been taken, that a significant part of the mini-budget will be U-turned upon, that perhaps the Prime Minister's most prominent policy plank from her leadership election, the biggest point of difference between her and Rishi Sunak, the cancellation of the increase to corporation tax, well, it looks like that could be U-turned upon, and that would be fairly seismic, not just for the policy direction of this government, but for the authority of this Prime Minister, and indeed the authority of the leadership election and the promises within it. It's hard to emphasise just how crucial this point was, so crucial a point that the Prime Minister was making it from the dispatch box at Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday, saying it would be absurd to raise taxes on British businesses as we face recessionary conditions.
Tom Harwood.
But it looks like this may well be what this government is just about to do.
Tom Harwood, thank you very much indeed for giving us the latest there. But for more discussion, we're delighted to be joined by Christopher Chope, MP for Christchurch. Thanks for joining us, Christopher. So look, all of this talk about U-turns, I want to look at the policy. And what do you think that we as a Conservative Party, you as a Conservative MP should be doing?
Well, if the government does the U-turn that's been talked about, then I think it's finished, frankly, because it would have lost all credibility. People like me who supported Liz Truss because she believed in low taxes and higher growth, we will feel completely betrayed. And to answer your question as to what should be done instead in order to reduce the turmoil in the markets, my suggestion would be that we should reduce public expenditure. It doesn't mean cutting public expenditure, it just means, for example, freezing public expenditure. And that would be consistent with the Prime Minister's promises. If we froze public expenditure, we'd save billions of pounds each year, and that would enable us to also reduce taxes or keep our tax reductions in place and enable the economy to grow.
Chris, you've been in Parliament for many years. You've seen many leaders, prime ministers come and go, contest. What's your assessment about the chances of Liz Truss surviving? Because that's what's on the front page of all the papers today. Can she survive? What's your assessment about that?
Well, it's in her own hands, Philip, because she's got a majority of 71. She's just won a leadership election, and she's got the support of a large number of backbenchers, including myself. So is she going to stick to her guns? Is she going to lose her nerve and capitulate? If she sticks to her guns, and I've always regarded her as a feisty, quiet, calm, but very intelligent lady, I think that if she sticks to her guns, she will be saved. If she doesn't stick to her guns, she's doomed.
But lots of backbenchers will be reading the polls. I think I saw one today, 53% for Labour, 19% for the Conservatives. Many backbenchers will be looking at this thinking, blooming heck, unless we do something here, I'm gonna lose my seat. The party's going to be out of government. What can she do to reassure those backbenchers that they should sit tight and stick with her?
By emphasising that we're not going to have a general election until 2024, and by emphasising that the government has got to get our economy moving again. And we've had this slow growth for years. And if the government's allowed to do what it wants to do, then in the short term it may be unpopular, but in the longer term, and that means by 2024, it will be popular. And just to give you an example, when I was leader of Wandsworth Council a long time ago, but when we had a similar economic crisis in the early 1980s, we reduced our expenditure by some 20% over 2 years. That was, in the short term, pretty unpopular. But the consequence of it was that for the next 40 years, the Conservatives retained control of Wandsworth Council because we were able to have the lowest council taxes in the country. So that's an example, from my own experience, of taking tough action, sticking out, resisting the criticism, not caving in, and then you will see the rewards in due course. And that's the message that the Prime Minister's got to get across to our colleagues.
And Christopher Chope, that's why we had you on the show today, to talk about that experience, to talk about how you've got to dig deep and stay the course. Thank you very much indeed. And just to say to our viewers, Kwasi Kwarteng has just now landed at Heathrow. God knows what greeting he's going to get, because all the journalists have been watching him, tracking him on an app on the full journey.
Too much to these journalists, Steve.
They'll be there waiting for him.
They've got too much time on their hands if they've got nothing better to do.
We'll bring David in here because, you know, there's lots of people, lots of viewers, lots of our viewers saying, Margaret says the Tories are mad to get rid of Truss and Kwasi. The so-called rebels are a disgrace and don't deserve to be governing. I shall never vote again if they force them out. They deserve the support of their own party. What Chris Chope was saying.
Yeah, and Brian says ex-Tory ministers trying to get their old job back. So what's causing all this trouble? Can't people see Boris planned this all along? He's relishing Truss's downfall. Interesting perspective.
So, David, I mean, complicated picture, isn't it? But you see, Christopher there is saying Liz needs to hold her nerve. Everybody knew about the corporation tax. It wasn't going to go up. You know, they want to keep it so it's competitive globally, so people come here. Should she stick to her guns?
Well, I mean, I completely agree with him politically. She does need to hold her nerve, and in that respect. But unfortunately, I think it's too late. I suspect the decision has already been made to do that U-turn, which is, of course, why Kwasi has just landed. But, I mean, it's... You know, the problem she's got is that she didn't have a majority of the MPs supporting her, even into the last two.
Do you think that? I don't, because people wanted to get behind a winner. You know, she went out, she did the debate, she won fair and square, so she was there. Was it just that they didn't sell the mini budget well enough, and now they have to go out making the narrative for what, you know, is a growth agenda and low tax agenda?
The selling of a mini budget was disastrous, but it was compounded by the fact that she, you know, didn't reach out to the other side. There's nobody from the other side of the Conservative Party in her cabinet. I mean, people like Greg Hands managed to get into kind of more junior roles, but it's, you know, there's a whole load of disgruntled, you know this, there's a whole load of disgruntled MPs on the Tory backbenches, and it's left her in a weak position.
I thought the most worrying thing was Chris Chope saying, as a supporter, that if she does a U-turn, the government's finished. I think that'll be the thing.
Well, that will be the other set of people going as well. Well, anyway, David, stay with us. You're with us for the next hour as well. But we've got a big sports weekend coming up with lots to dissect from midweek 2.
She's still crowing about Liverpool scoring 7 goals.
I bet she is.
Yeah,
and Man City not scoring any.
Yeah, well, that's 10 men, and they're three of their best players.
Who this is, and who better to speak to than broadcaster and sports writer Aidan McGee.
How you doing? Okay.
Yes, thanks.
This is nice for a Friday, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. Normally you're usually telling me to shut up, and now you're telling politicians to wind up quickly. I like that. But no, Liverpool.
Treat everybody fairly.
Yeah, I know.
Don't discriminate at all.
Well, we need more referees like you. We show more consistency across the board. But yeah, brilliant performance by Liverpool, wasn't it? Mo Salah coming off the bench, a 6-minute hat trick. But the thing is that was not as easy a game as it looked. Yes, Rangers tired in the last sort of half an hour of the game, and the team like Liverpool are capable of rattling in goals, as we saw. But they went behind in that game. They suffered an early setback. There was the rarefied atmosphere of that iBox crowd. First time they played a competitive match there. That would have taken it out of them on the Wednesday. Manchester City, by contrast, of course, City play Liverpool on the Sunday, and we're looking ahead to that game. Man City, by contrast, rested Erling Haaland. They rested Phil Foden and they rested Bernardo Silva. Those players are going to be fresh for Sunday. Manchester City didn't need to win in midweek. They just eased to a goalless draw in Copenhagen with 10 men, and then we got to Sunday. We get to Sunday, and as Jurgen Klopp said, they know they're going to be a different side to over the hill.
Liverpool needed a win, didn't they?
Without doubt,
and
yeah.
they needed a definitive win like that. So I see what you're saying. It's going to be difficult later on in the week. They'll all have to be rested.
Oh, they had to, yeah.
Liverpool had to pull out.
Oh, without doubt. They're now second in the group, and all the English clubs look good in the Champions League now. They're either top or second in their group, so that's good. But looking ahead to Sunday, Liverpool fall 16 points behind. I think that's curtains for them. Jurgen Klopp admitted that he said he's out of the title race anyway. If they win on Sunday, suddenly the momentum switches. But with Liverpool having to attack and having to really go for the jugular in that game, I think my concern for Liverpool will be there'll be gaps left behind, and with those City players looking fresh and hungry. I mean, the only other thing I would say is that City's record at Anfield is absolutely lamentable. I mean, they've won there once since 2003, and that was when there's no crowd in there, so they didn't have to deal with that Anfield factor. But the crowd will be on top of them on Sunday. It's going to be a very difficult game for them as well.
Your dad will be there, won't he?
Yeah, we certainly will.
He will?
He will.
Where does he sit? Is he in the Cop?
No.
Whereabouts?
Do you know what? Shame on Dad, he's got to take us yet, so I can't tell you where his new seat is.
Fair enough.
But he goes he's a die-hard fan there.
Yeah. And because I always like to get horse racing in, it's the Champions Day at Ascot tomorrow. Big flat meeting of the year. The world's best horse officially, Baid, is running at Ascot tomorrow. So if anyone's close by,
Hang on, how did you say Ascot?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Something from a bit earlier on, how do you say it right? Ascot or Ascot?
Well,
have you got any tips?
No. I think Baid will win, but it's an unbackable price. It's the best horse in the world, so it ought to win. But so I wouldn't recommend anyone backs it. But but it's a great day of horse racing tomorrow.
Indeed.
And what about
Eubank?
Yeah, Eubank was an interesting one because we saw Chris Eubank Sr. going off on one yesterday, and that's a little bit of a glib way of saying it, actually. I mean, he accused the promoters, and obviously his the fight involving his son, Chris Eubank Jr. last week, was meant to go ahead against Conor Benn Jr. Conor Benn. And so he's accused, given that those two fighters were meant to be fighting at a catch weight, which means that one had to come down and reduce his weight, i.e. Chris Eubank's son, and Conor Benn had to go up a weight. He said it was unhealthy to fight, and he used some really worrying terminology. He said that they were trying to murder his son. He wasn't in support. He wasn't in support of that fight. He said that you can't have fighters fighting an unnatural weight. His son in particular was boiled down. He really was. He was skimmed down and obviously Conor Benn we saw was tested positive for banned substances. So it's a very difficult situation it's damaged boxing, and he's attacking the promoters. Yes, you could say, well, hang on a minute, your son signed the contract. He's going further now and saying, my son didn't listen to me. I didn't want any part of this. Chris Eubank's recently lost a son as well, so he's speaking from a very emotive standpoint, but it's a very, very chilling reminder that boxing is such a dangerous sport, and he just wants to see fighters fighting at their natural weight. The problem with this was that this was a legacy fight. Everyone assumed for years that Ben Jr. would fight Eubank Jr., and it was a legacy fight going back from 30 years. But you know what? If the weight doesn't match, it shouldn't happen. And that's what we're seeing increasingly in boxing now. We're seeing these unnatural matches, and we've already seen some fatalities in the sport in the last 20 years. We don't want to see more.
Unnatural matches and also enhancements that have been taken. That doubly actually adds to the difficulties
it's worrying.
and problems. Aidan McGee, thank you very much indeed for coming.
See you tomorrow.
Will indeed. We've got another packed hour lined up for you after this short break. And of course, keep those views coming in. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. See you soon.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, welcome back. You're watching GB News with me, Esther McVeigh, and Philip Davis on your TV, listening to it on your radio and online. And we're with you until midday with a show that is jam-packed with some of today's biggest stories.
Make sure you get in touch with your views as usual on gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be getting to those throughout the show, but first it's time for the latest news headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Philip. Good morning. It's 2 minutes past 11. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Chancellor's just landed back in the UK a day early. Amid speculation, the government's about to do a U-turn on its economic plans. Kwasi Kwarteng was due to attend a final day of meetings at the IMF's annual gathering in the US today. His early return comes as the Prime Minister's expected to scrap parts of the mini-budget in the coming days as pressure mounts on the government to reassure the markets. The pledge to end the planned 6% rise in corporation tax is widely seen as a likely casualty as Liz Truss seeks to save her premiership. Speaking to GB News, Trade Minister Greg Hands played down speculation.
I don't believe an announcement is coming, but what I do know is that in just 2 weeks' time, the government will be laying out its medium-term fiscal plan. Kwasi Kwarteng as Chancellor of the Exchequer in the House of Commons, with a full forecast and report from the Office for Budget Responsibility in the proper way, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
Well, speaking to GB News earlier, Professor of Economics Jonathan Portes argued the mini-budget was never plausible.
It would be very difficult to come up with a worse plan for managing the economy than they have done so far, in my view. Because not only was the plan a bad one, but the way that they have handled it, the way they've presented it to the markets by sort of, and to the public indeed, by saying, oh, we're going to tear up the old orthodoxy, and that's going to generate growth, which will pay for these large tax cuts. That was never plausible.
Royal Mail says it's planning to make up to 6,000 people redundant by next August after announcing losses of more than £200 million. The company says it's started notifying workers of its plan, which aims to reduce its overall headcount by a total of 10,000. The majority of the cuts will be made through redundancy, while the rest will be through what they call natural attrition. Royal Mail's expecting its full-year losses to hit £350 million. Labour has pledged to try and ban fracking once and for all, calling it an unjust charter for earthquakes. The opposition plans to work cross-party with all MPs that oppose the controversial gas extraction method. The government's decision to lift the fracking ban in England has been scrutinised in recent weeks. It had been in place since 2019 following a series of earth tremors. Shadow Climate Secretary Ed Miliband says his party will oppose the Conservatives' dodgy plans to impose expensive, dirty and dangerous fracking on British people. Ian Russell, the father of the 14-year-old who ended her life after viewing suicide content online, has urged social media companies not to drag their feet. It comes after a coroner in the Molly Russell inquest recommended platforms be required to do more to protect children online, including separate platforms for adults and children. Instagram's parent company Meta has said it supports more regulation of social media and is committed to making Instagram a safe and positive experience for everyone. In the US, 5 people, including an off-duty police officer, have been shot dead in North Carolina. The shooting happened in Raleigh near a popular trail that runs through part of the city. At least 2 other people, including another police officer, were wounded and taken to hospital. Police say a suspect has been arrested. The motive for the attack is not yet known. And the US House of Representatives Committee has voted unanimously to subpoena Donald Trump in its Capitol riots investigation. The former president will now have to give evidence to the committee about the events of the 6th of January last year, which saw 5 people killed. If he doesn't, he could face imprisonment. The committee argues Mr. Trump was directly involved in a bid to overturn the 2020 US election result. He denies the accusations. Speaking to GB News, Professor David Dunn said the subpoena could go one of 2 ways.
Now, as far as the Democrats are concerned, what they hope is that the theatre of Trump sitting there actually reminds people of his criminality. But of course, it's entirely possible that it could go the other way, in actually that Trump portrays himself and is portrayed by his supporting media and the Republican Party as some sort of martyr, and that mobilizes the Republican Party's base to come out in the midterms and support him further in becoming the candidate for president in 2024.
And thousands of people across Australia's southeast have been told to leave their homes after 2 days of heavy rain have caused flash flooding. Large parts of Victoria, southern New South Wales and parts of Tasmania saw more than a month's worth of rain fall over the last 48 hours. Though heavy rains are expected to ease later, officials are warning flooding could continue through the weekend. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Esther and Philip.
Good morning, welcome back. You're watching GB News with me, Philip Davis,
and me,
Esther McVeigh, on your TV, radio and online.
We've got an action-packed hour of TV for you. Here's what's coming up this morning. To start the show, we will again be joined by David Maddox. He'll be here, as will Claire. But what have we got?
Is violence in the UK out of hand? Are we becoming an aggressive nation? What are the police doing to prevent violence? Lots of questions to answer, and we'll be talking more about this later on.
And we'll be back looking at some of the biggest stories from around the world, including Donald Trump being subpoenaed and a bizarre story concerning cows and...
I'm not sure you can say that.
Oh, go on, you say it rather than me. It's more of a bloke sings.
Passing wind.
Oh, passing wind. Thank you very much. I knew you'd have an alternative word.
Thank you very much. That was before the watershed, that. All of that coming up and much more across the programme, and you can get in touch with your views as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
So here are some of your views coming in. I think we've got to read some of these out. We've had so many coming in. Phil?
Well, there's lots about the protesters and all those people gluing themselves to the road. Stuart says the Highways Act 1980, Section 137, if a person without authority or excuse in any way willfully obstructs the free passage along a highway, he is guilty of an offence. Not really ambiguous, is it? So what's stopping the police from acting?
Now, like Richard here, Richard said, I do not support mob rule, but under certain circumstances, people should do a citizen's arrest. There's a right to a citizen's arrest as prescribed in Law 24A12 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984. This does not need to be done correctly, but with both so few police constables and so many lawbreakers disrupting whole communities, it may well be the way forward. We've got quite a few legal eagles watching the TV today, all finger these sections and laws at the fingertips.
We've also got lots about Liz Truss. James says, folks, if the Prime Minister is replaced and they do a major U-turn, then they are finished. Labour will walk into government. I'd vote Labour at this point.
Yeah, and I voted Conservative last time. There is no way I could vote for them again while they're backstabbing each other on a daily basis. What is going on, asks Sam.
And Elizabeth says, if you were to replace Liz Truss, please do not put Penny Mordaunt in as Prime Minister. She is just not up to the job. Rishi Sunak, while slippery, could probably at least do it. but not her ever. That's what
Nobody's
Elizabeth
pulling the
thinks.
punches this morning.
No,
aren't they?
no,
Saying
that's why we love. That's why we love the views.
I was going to say that. So we've got loads more to get through, but please keep sending your views in. But before we go any further, Matt, we're delighted that we're joined in the studio by the Conservative counsellor and commentator Claire Purcell. So again, what has caught your eyes in the paper?
Well, following on really from your class discussion. And it's the very sad fact that Blackpool has been ranked as the unhealthiest area to live in England. Now, we've all spent time in Blackpool for party conferences, and it's beautiful. I love my time up there, and I think it's really quite sad to find that the life expectancy of people there is so much lower than the rest of the country. And a lot of it is to do with the incoming tourism and fast food, and just general sort of health and well-being not being met in that area. So I think for levelling up purposes, we really need to look at areas like that. Seaside towns as a whole, I think, will need some extra input from the government. And I just think it's particularly sad for what was a beautiful seaside town has been left to suffer in this way.
Now, just one thing I wanted to say, Claire, and we'll pick up on that story. I know Liz Truss is going to be doing a press conference today. This is just coming in on the news here. So she'll be doing a press conference and we will be covering it live on GB News. So when we know what's happening, we'll be bringing you that latest news, but she will be doing a press conference later today. But I totally agree with you there. I used to live on the Wirral, and in Wirral, a small peninsula, the life expectancy between one side to the other side was 15 years. So you had Birkenhead one side, and you had Caldy and Heswall the other side, and it was about sort of education, it was about job, it was about sort of health, and it was all of those issues. But in a small peninsula, that difference was incredible.
I haven't read the story, Clem. Perhaps you can help us. I wondered whether or not these sort of places, it was more to do with the levels of drug dependency in those places and the number of drug addicts that brings down the levels of overall life expectancy. Is that?
I think in part it is, but it is, this particular study has already picked out the public health reasons. So drugs are going to be one side of it, but it is also the availability of fast food and that kind of cheap culture of buy one, get one free, kids getting free sweets, all of those kind of things, which I think add up to it. But I do think that there is the public health problem of drug and alcohol addiction. That brings a part into it when you've got low levels of unemployment, high levels of unemployment and also low engagement with education. So I think it's a bit of a mixture of both. And the council are onto that one as we speak.
David, did you want to come in on this?
Speaking as a Norfolk boy. Yeah, I'll try and get my regional accent there, but it's, I remember I was spending lots of time in Great Yarmouth as a kid, and actually that story, it makes me very sad, that story, because what we've seen over a number of years now is a rundown of our seaside towns and a real disinvestment in them. And this health story about is a kind of legacy of that. It'd be nice for Blackpool, for example, if the Conservatives would go back and have their conference there.
I agree.
But to me, it's all, about education and knowing there is hope and there is somewhere to go to. Sometimes that feeling of despondency and despair, there is nothing else there, is what it said makes you self-medicate maybe and go on drugs. So, yes, it's about education.
Now, the story I wanted to raise that I saw in the Telegraph today, and it's in other papers as well, but is about Gary Lineker and his tweet about the Conservatives broke BBC impartiality rules. Now, who would have thought it? Gary Lineker has broken impartiality rules. Some of us have been saying it for years. The BBC have just realised, believe it or not, and officially he's now broken BBC impartiality rules. Now, he earns, just for the record, £1.35 million a year for presenting Match of the Day, pretty much from what I've seen. I've been watching Match of the Day for decades. I couldn't care less who presented it, to be perfectly honest. I wanted to watch the highlights. I certainly don't want to watch Gary Lineker. But what do you think they should do, David, with Gary Lineker now? Is it time for the BBC to just get rid of him?
Well, they did bring in this rule, didn't they, that BBC people weren't supposed to be tweeting their politics. And I seem to remember they gave Gary Lineker an exemption at the time. It's a nonsense. He's been using it as a platform for politics for ages and ages now. It's very hard to... I did a story the other day, actually, about the campaign to stop people from being taken to court for non-payment their TV licence because a lot of people can't afford it in the cost of living crisis. And, you know, it's very hard to justify paying 1.35 million?
1.35 million, yeah.
35
Nice
million
work
a
if you
year
can get it. To watch football.
On the back of taxpayers, essentially, to watch football highlights.
Will both of you stay with us? We'll be talking through some other stories, but the police watchdog has said a man who was fatally shot by armed officers in a police station car park had earlier been tackled with a stun grenade, a baton and a taser too, but to no effect.
Let's now cross to our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, who has more on the story. Will, what can you tell us?
Yes, well, it was only a week ago that this was still very much a fresh and developing incident, and there were very few answers. Where we are now on Ascot Drive, a very busy road in South Derby, the road was completely closed off. No one could get in and out except for police, and police were investigating what exactly had happened. They later revealed to us that one, Marius Ciolac, who's 35 years old and a Romanian national, had been killed by armed officers. Just to give you that background, what's believed to have happened was armed officers were called to a situation where Mr. Marius was believed to be smashing glass here at the police station, and as you quite rightly just said there in your intro, the IOPC report, which is now investigating into what happened. In the update, they said that police used multi-bang stun grenades, tasers and a baton round before firing a single gunshot which hit Mr. Ciolac in his abdomen. He did go to hospital, but the IOPC says it was from that gunshot wound that Mr. Ciolac later died, and they were citing provisional post-mortem evidence that they found. The investigating police watchdog has said that they also found 3 different knives of varying sizes in the scene, and they were taken as evidence. They're also now going on to the next stage of this process, because it is going to be quite a long process. They're going to be looking at hundreds of hours of CCTV. They're going to be speaking to different witnesses, and they also add that police officers are being classed as witnesses to this incident. Now, very crucially here, the IOPC, the independent watchdog, has said that while in a community like this, people will always be looking for answers, they're asking people not to commit to speculation or rumour as they do continue their investigation. And when that investigation ends, there will quite rightly be a post-mortem, there will quite rightly be an inquest into what exactly happened and why it was that Mr. Ciolac died a week ago.
Will Hollis, thank you very much indeed for giving us that update. I mean, it's everywhere you look, there's sort of violence, and it's really worrying. I think you mentioned in the last hour about sort of people, you know, about law and order and all the problems associated with it. You know, it seems everywhere you look in the newspapers or hear on the news, it's always, you know, shootings, or there's, you know, people with knives, carrying knives, knife crime. It's worrying, isn't it?
It is a really worrying time, and I think I live in a relatively small village, but antisocial behaviour has been on the increase, and police don't seem to have the resources to come and deal with it. And rural crime is enormous. We have tractors and things being stolen on an almost daily basis. And these are people's livelihoods that have been taken away from them, and the sorting out of that afterwards. And I think this is why people get so fed up, and they will look at the news and you'll see there are more stabbings in London, some pretty horrific events, and young people being more and more involved in these. And there doesn't seem to be a solution. And I think that's what concerns people the most, is that they can't see a way out of it.
Have you got another story there for us, Claire?
I do. I mean, this one, I think this is sort of quite interesting from an immigration point of view, and I do like to look at these stories. And this is the first British woman and child repatriated from a Syrian camp. And I think this is interesting because we haven't done that previously. These sort of so-called ISIS brides have been there, and, you know, and I think the majority of us would quite happily sort of say, well, they've made their bed, they go lie in it. But it sort of comes off the back of other countries like Australia starting to repatriate citizens out of these camps. So I think it's quite an interesting story. It's quite an interesting look at what policies may come forward for the Home Office. I think these are really difficult conversations, and I think that this one needs a little bit more looking at. So I'm not sure what sort of your views on it, but having worked at the Home Office, I can see the difficulties on all sides.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you for that. We need to move on. I was also just catching my eye was David Hockney painting sells for £21 million, I think it says.
Did you want it?
Well, no, it's just that the Hockney collection is actually in Salts Mill in my constituency. So if anybody wants to go and see Hockney's works of art, they should get themselves up to Shipley. But that did catch my eye because of David Hockney's relationship there. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah, you did.
Thank you. Coming up, we'll look forward to Liz Truss's press conference, which will take place later on today. And keep those views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's now 11:24, and what a day, what a couple of weeks it has been for the Prime Minister, Liz Truss. I mean, papers like City AM saying it's another roller coaster of a day. We know that Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor, has already arrived in Heathrow, and there's going to be a press conference a little bit later on, which GB News will be taking live. So we'll give you all the latest news here. But we're still joined in the studio by David Maddox. We've still got Claire Purcell here. So really, it is now, we've got this press conference coming forward. Obviously, the pressure on the Prime Minister to do something. Is it going to be a U-turn on that mini-budget? Is she going to stand firm? We had a guest on this morning, Chris Chope, MP there, who was a backer of her, saying, actually, if she does a U-turn, she's finished. And yet we've had other people saying, it's so inevitable now, this is what's going to happen. And some of those papers, you've got one there, have been very cruel to her today, haven't they, David?
Well, yes, I'm just looking at, my sister paper, the Daily Star, is, in its own inimitable fashion, is, is comparing her to a wet lettuce at the moment, and has got a front page there of which will last longer, her or the lettuce, which is cruel in a way, but it is.
And inside, it's there you go.
Worse, you know.
She's got lettuce Liz heads for the iceberg.
Exactly.
Quite a good headline, isn't it? Whether you agree with the sentiment or not, it's a very.
But what I meant is they've got a ticking clock on her for 6 days, saying she won't last. Other people are saying it's longer to the 31st of October.
Yeah, the Mail was saying 17 days. We were hearing similar things yesterday. I mean, 31st of October, of course, is a crucial date because that's when the next budget statement or financial statement or whatever it's going to be is meant to be, and that's when they can reset. But it looks like they may well be resetting today.
But I take it that nobody was expecting this press conference, David, in the journalistic world. This has sort of come out of the blue.
It has a bit, and I think it kind of shows the gravity of the situation she's in.
And I said that people view you in Parliament as a sort of priest. Everybody comes to you like the confessional box and tells you what's happening. So what have MPs been saying? Have you seen a movement of all those people who were cheering her on merely weeks ago now moving away and abandoning her?
It's kind of gone back to peak Partygate mood, in the sense of just everybody comes and I sit there in Portcullis House with a coffee, and everybody comes to me from your side, from your colleague's side, just depressed again, and they just don't see any way out of this. Apart from a new leader, which is amazing.
Here, Michael, I think it is, who said, is it Sue or Michael?
It's Sue.
Sue, sorry, Sue. I've voted Tory since I got the vote in 1972 and probably have more political knowledge than most in the current politicians in Parliament. If they change the leader again by coronation, I will definitely resign my subscription and never vote for them again.
And Barry says, thanks to the press and the parties wanting to get into power and bitter, resentful MPs, they've managed to force a situation to make the Prime Minister and Chancellor look like fools, forced to change course to please those who want no change. Such a shame. I just wondered, Claire, whether or not this press conference might be an attempt by the Prime Minister to sort of, in effect, get over these newspaper headlines and appeal directly to the public.
Yeah, I hope that it is that. I hope that she is going to use it to settle the mood, to reassure people. I think some form of U-turn is inevitable. But if you style that in a way that you have listened, you've looked at evidence, you can work these things out. I think half the problem has been the communication around the mini-budget and the plans going forward. I think that the Prime Minister has had a pretty rough hand dealt to her. I think she's got ambitious plans, but they haven't been communicated to the party and to the public. So hopefully this is now her opportunity.
Interesting. People are saying, a bit like during COVID and lockdown with those sort of daily, weekly conferences where the public could understand what was going on. This is such turbulent financial times. Should they be doing that? Is this press conference going to be the start of that, to say, look, this is what's happening. This is what's happening around the world. This is what's happening in Europe. Look at what's happening with the federal bank, in the States. We have got to stick together. This is our plan. We want growth. We're giving people more money in the pockets. Is this what we should be doing?
Yes, it absolutely is. This would be a perfect opportunity to point out what the Prime Minister is doing for families. So putting it down to basics, to say this is how much better off you will be, this is what we're doing, these are the problems we're encountering. And I think if you start to lay it out and explain things a lot better, people will understand, and I think some of that anger will row back. I mean, this is a global problem, as we all know.
I just wondered, David, if I've got a proposition to put to you. See what you make of this.
Think very carefully. Don't jump
I just think it's very difficult. You mentioned earlier, David, that it's very difficult for the Chancellor to have to, in effect, unpick his own policies. And when he said that anyone who opposes what he did was part of an anti-growth coalition, presumably if the government start opposing what they've previously announced, they'll be accused of being part of the anti-growth coalition. I just wondered, how about this? What if might Liz Truss at some point come to the conclusion that if she's to survive, her best hope of doing so is A, to sack the Chancellor, to let him in effect carry the can for everything that's happened, and how about this as part B, asking Rishi Sunak if he'll take over as Chancellor? What do you think about that as a survival strategy?
That would be an interesting survival strategy. I can see certainly happening, although I have to say that it'd be a little bit unfair given that the Anti-Growth Coalition was the centrepiece of her speech to conference, and actually most of them seem to be on the backbenches of the Conservative Party at the moment. But to bring in Rishi Sunak, that would be an extraordinary U-turn in terms of that really would be the mother of all U-turns, having taken lumps out of each other on the economy and tax policy.
But in a way, they send out a message they could come together. So you might think, as people are talking about Penny Mordaunt and Rishi Sunak, maybe she's thinking, well, I'm here, I'm staying here, therefore Rishi can work with me. And what she shouldn't forget, look, comment pieces in, whether it's the Telegraph, low corporation tax is good for Britain. If you're looking at whether it's Fraser Nelson here, you know, political death, what could be worse? Actually going against your policies, your beliefs, your principles, and not doing everything. They're sort of prevaricating and being pushed about. So there's lots of support for what she said. And my goodness, she'd said it for long enough. Corporation tax, keep it down, get national insurance contributions back. Labour voted for that one. There is lots of support there.
There is, but I do wonder sometimes if all of this was just too much at once. So the ideas on their own are pretty good, and the growth for the UK would be much better off if we had that. But I think it was everything all at once, which then destabilised the markets, and MPs and their constituents started to be very, very concerned. Mortgage rates and mortgages offers being withdrawn. I think everything was just too much. So I think perhaps she needs to go back and look at maybe doing these things incrementally, and that will solve a problem.
Claire, David, thank you for now. We will continue our conversation about the upcoming press conference as we
approach it.
As we go. But first of all, we're going to go to the news headlines with Rhiannon.
Philip, thank you. It's 11:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Prime Minister Liz Truss will hold a news conference this afternoon amid reports the government's about to backtrack on some of its mini-budget plans. That as the Chancellor's just landed back in the UK a day early amid speculation the government's about to do a U-turn on its economic plans. Kwasi Kwarteng was due to attend a final day of meetings at the IMF's annual gathering in the US today. The pledge to end the planned 6% rise in corporation tax is widely seen as a likely casualty. Speaking to GB News earlier, Trade Minister Greg Hands played down speculation.
I don't believe an announcement is coming, but what I do know is that in just 2 weeks' time, the government will be laying out its medium-term fiscal plan. Kwasi Kwarteng as Chancellor of the Exchequer in the House of Commons with a full forecast and report from the Office for Budget Responsibility in the proper way, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
Royal Mail says it's planning to make up to 6,000 people redundant by next August after announcing losses of more than £200 million. The company says it started notifying workers of its plan, which aims to reduce its overall headcount by a total of 10,000. The majority of the cuts will be made through redundancy, while the rest will be through what they call natural attrition. In the US, 5 people, including an off-duty police officer, have been shot dead in North Carolina. The shooting happened in Raleigh, near a popular trail that runs through part of the city. At least 2 people, including another police officer, were wounded and taken to hospital. Police say a suspect has been arrested. The motive for the attack is not yet known. And thousands of people across Australia's southeast have been told to leave their homes after 2 days of heavy rain caused flash flooding. Some areas have seen more than a month's worth of rain fall over the last 48 hours. Though heavy rain is expected to ease later, officials are warning flooding could continue through the weekend. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Philip and Esther will be back in just a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. As we've been talking about, the Prime Minister is set to hold a press conference later this afternoon. To give us the latest, we're joined by our political reporter, Catherine Forster. Catherine, what can you tell us?
Well, things seem to be moving very swiftly today. We've learnt in the last few minutes that there is going to be a Downing Street press conference this afternoon, early to mid-afternoon time. Exact time is to be confirmed. We also know, of course, that the Chancellor has come back early from his meeting with the International Monetary Fund in Washington. The flight landed at Heathrow in the last hour. He's en route to Downing Street, will probably arrive very shortly. And obviously there are going to be face-to-face discussions between him and the Prime Minister.
Can I also say you've got the phone, your phone, on the tabletop here because everything is so fluid, moving so quickly. You did say if the phone rings, if it pings, this is up-to-the-minute sort of information because of that press conference.
There is a lot of speculation about the position of the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng. I mean, this has been going on for some time, obviously, because at party conference, after the first U-turn, the rowing back on the cut of the 45p tax rate, but in the last days, increasing speculation that another major U-turn is coming, almost certainly likely to be on corporation tax, which was due to be held at 19p by Kwarteng. Rishi Sunak, the previous Chancellor, of course, was going to put it up to 25. So how much of the not-so-mini budget that was announced just, I think, 3 weeks ago is now going to be rowed back on? We don't know, but it seems likely that a significant amount, and the markets are already pricing that in.
So let's get this right. You're telling us now, this is the latest news, what you're hearing, people contacting you, getting Kwasi might be possibly going, resigning, or whatever it is. And if, because we don't know, you're just getting all of these phone calls coming into you and texts and messages coming into you. If that were the case, who do we think would be replacing Kwasi? This is an if.
I've just said Rishi. I said she should ask Rishi Sunak.
I'm going to throw another name in the hat here, Andrea Leadsom, who would have been the Chancellor to Penny Mordaunt if she'd have been leader. So can we see, and I'll bring in, obviously, David Maddox as well, from The Express here, who could it be? Could it even be Andrea Leadsom?
It could be Andrea Leadsom. I suppose at a stretch it could be Rishi Sunak, even though...
You're coming round to my way of thinking.
I mean, only in the sense that I can see your point in terms of a unity ticket, but actually, I mean, it would not bear much scrutiny given how the two were at each other about economic policy over the summer.
But he could say, but I set out this path. I said this was what happened. I'm very knowledgeable. I'm from the world of finance. Rishi, it's pretty much played out as he said. So is there a coming together? And I think that's unity ticket. And I'm going to come back to Catherine here. How important is it now when you've got fevered speculation, you've got the MPs unhappy with one another? Would it not be a perfect coming together to bring all the MPs together, these two opposition, these two who were fighting it out only weeks ago to be leader of the party?
It's possible, and I should say, we're speculating, aren't we, at the moment? We don't know until we know, but I would be utterly astonished if Rishi Sunak was prepared to announce that he would be Chancellor under Liz Truss. Utterly astonished.
Thanks ever so much. Keep looking at the phone to give us the latest. But we're going to now head over to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who's over in Westminster at College Green. Tom, what's happening?
That is the question on everyone's lips. But yes, as you were just discussing there, an exclusive story from the Times newspaper indicates that the Chancellor may well be sacked today. That would make him the shortest serving, or I should say the second shortest serving Chancellor in the history of the United Kingdom. Second shortest, only because the shortest serving Chancellor happened to die 1 month into the job, which really, I suppose, is not his fault. So when we're coming to where we are today, this is the most extraordinary situation. A government that sees its authority draining away by the minute. Only 3 hours ago, Number 10 was putting out the line that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are in lockstep. And now we are expecting the Chancellor to lose his job today. And the Prime Minister alone, we understand, as things stand, to make a press conference, one of these famous press conferences we got to know so well during the era of COVID. Those press conferences in that briefing room in Number 9 Downing Street that remind us all of times of crisis. Well, the Prime Minister will stand at that Downing Street lectern in that room and announce, we understand, that she is reversing her signature policy plank. The policy plank that got her elected as Prime Minister in the first place by the Conservative Party membership. The policy plank that she defended spiritedly on Wednesday afternoon at Prime Minister's questions, standing at the dispatch box of the House of Commons, saying that it would be wrong to raise taxes at a time when the government is trying to attract inward investment to the United Kingdom, that it would be wrong to raise taxes on businesses as the country faces recessionary conditions, that raising taxes on businesses, in the words of the Prime Minister, could bring in less revenue. Well, this afternoon it's expected she may well say the opposite. It's the most extraordinary turnaround, almost impossible to see how it can be justified.
Tom, I just wondered, do we know exactly where the Chancellor is? Because, I mean, it's bad enough to be sacked, I suspect. But to have somebody tell the Times that you've been sacked when you've not been told yourself seems to me to be a particular kick in the proverbials. I mean, where is he? Has he got back yet? Will he be reading this on his text message that he's coming back to be sacked?
Yes, his plane landed around half an hour ago. He has got out of the plane now and is in a government car, a government convoy, the last I saw, hurtling his way back to London. Now, I've been trying to contact some of his advisors. I have to say I haven't had any responses yet, perhaps understandably, but really it does look like this is likely the end of the road for the Chancellor, and that is a very difficult position for the Prime Minister. It's hard to emphasise how close a pair of MPs, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, were. They both got elected in 2010. They wrote a book together. They'd been ideological allies in the House of Commons for a long time and were expected to form an incredibly close partnership between Number 10 and Number 11, a closer partnership than any Chancellor and Prime Minister for quite some time. And of course, there's the British political tradition of Chancellors and Prime Ministers growing grudges against one another, whether it's Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson, Philip Hammond and Theresa May, Blair and Brown famously, of course. This was supposed to be so very different. And yet now it looks to ensure her own political survival, the Chancellor is being thrown under a bus.
Tom Harwood, thanks ever so much for giving us that latest update. If you do hear from any of Kwasi Kwarteng's allies, please let us know.
I'm sure he will.
We'd love to. We'd love to. David, I just wondered, I mean, Tom said that, the close soulmates, Kwasi and Liz, which everybody knows that, and that she might be sacking him to save her own skin. I suppose the question is, will sacking her save her own skin, or will it make her position more doubtful?
Well, she will essentially be getting rid of one of her two best allies. I mean, another name I'd chuck in for the Chancellor job is Therese Coffey, who was being discussed as a possible Chancellor during the leadership contest. So, and that's the other one of her main allies within the cabinet. She's about to reverse on her, as Tom was saying, on her signature policy. I mean, it's hard to see how much credibility she'll have left after such a short time.
Lots of people thought that they wanted to get past the drama of the Boris era, and here we are now in a different form of a drama. They thought Liz Truss would have been a more sort of, I don't know, as I say, less dramatic character, and we would go to steadier times. This is not happening at all, is it? Some might say it's worse. It's everything's speeded up.
Well, I mean, essentially, she rolled the dice on the economy, and the markets didn't like it, and that's created the mother of all dramas, really. Much more serious in their own right than parties in Downing Street, because as we were discussing earlier, pensions and also investments and people's livelihoods are now at risk.
And I always think, when somebody says there's going to be a press conference outside Number 10, the first things that come to my mind, I mean, these are invariably very big announcements. And Catherine, you'll be bringing us the latest on this, because I think back to David Cameron announcing that he wasn't going to...
Well, this is inside. I think this is inside Downing Street. I don't think she's
she's not going to do outside.
Like the COVID ones, the COVID...
Is she going to do it there?
My understanding is that it's inside a home.
Oh, is it inside, not outside? OK, because sometimes the gravity is somewhat raised somewhat if it's outside, because that is usually, I remember Theresa May coming out, we're going to have a general election, David Cameron saying he's standing down after the Brexit result. So you think this is going to be inside, as if it were one of those COVID conferences?
I do, and I think all that we can safely say is there's going to be no announcement of a general election. That's pretty much the only thing that everybody, bar Labour and the Lib Dems and the SNP, can agree, that the Conservatives absolutely do not want a general election at any cost, because, I mean, the People's Poll, a GB News People's Poll out today, these Labour leads are horrific for the Conservatives. So, I mean, talking about who might, if indeed this Times story does turn out to be true, and they're generally very well informed, but of course it's not confirmed. I wonder about Sajid Javid. Obviously, he would be a unity.
Well, you've got a point there. He's been in the papers quite a bit as well this week, talking about the very sad story about his brother and suicide, talking about other things. So he's definitely been at the forefront of the news the past couple of weeks, if they have prepared it that well.
I just think that, do you not think, if I was Liz Truss and I was getting rid of, I'd be thinking, Rishi Sunak sits on the back benches as an alternative prime minister to lots of Conservative backbenchers. He sort of sat there, isn't he? And if Liz Truss was put under pressure to go, that he would be, it seems to me, the person that will be the most obvious person that people would turn to. And so if you bring him into you might have to eat some humble pie, but you're eating some humble pie anyway by sacking your Chancellor. If you brought him in, then you remove that alternative prime minister on the backbenchers. You tie him in to what the government does. If the government is successful, then she's fine. And if the government isn't successful, he's wrapped up in it as well.
Don't get me wrong, you're quite right. People say, make sure they're on the inside of the tent, not on the outside of the tent. So there's an element of that. Absolutely. It's calming him in a way, give him a role. But it also means if he resigned and said, this isn't great what you're doing, Prime Minister, destabilise it, going for the top job. I've got another name for you. What about Michael Gove?
Oh, he's blotted his copybook.
There's no
chance of that.
You all said, oh, no chance
There's
not.
There's more chance of me getting the job than Michael Gove.
Well, a good Yorkshireman who's tight with the money, looking at the cost of living, looking at the value for money.
I'm not building up my own prospects by saying that.
No, but I think, look, we've got it. There's not just one thing, who is the best person for the job. It's got to be who is then going to steady the ship, who is then going to bring the MPs on board. And then, most importantly, we've got to think about the public. Who have they got faith in? How are we going to deliver policies for them? It's not about our drama in Parliament. It's about the public.
You talk about the public. I mean, lots of views have been coming in, understandably, about this, and lots of support for Liz Truss amongst the viewers. Caroline says the disgruntled backbenchers in the Conservative Party who voted for Sunak are suffering from sour grapes. All their griping and sniping demonstrates to the public that they are nothing but a big bunch of babies.
And I've got Mike here. All backbenchers railing against Truss and Quartak need to grow up, and each and every one needs to grow a pair. This country now has a positive outlook in the economic world due to Truss and Quartak policies. The negative backbenchers, including all the doomsters within the Conservative Party and the Bank of England, all need further education in economics if they think the way forward is to maintain the status quo. Harsh words coming in here, isn't it? All saying, stick to your guns.
Yeah, John says, I voted for Liz Truss because I preferred her policies, along with the majority of other Tory party members, against the wishes of the majority of Tory MPs. However, it seems her policies are being ditched because Tory MPs refuse to accept the democratic will of the members in favour of Sunak's same old rubbish.
Got Mikey here. How can Rishi Sunak be considered at all for Prime Minister? Boris was hounded out because he lied and was fined. So was Rishi Sunak. So lots of people coming in with all different views here.
Well, this is the dilemma, because Les says in effect what Chris Chope said on the show earlier today. He says Liz Truss was elected on tax cutting to kickstart the economy. If this is reversed, she must step down or the Tories will lose all credibility. So that, Catherine, I guess, is the dilemma that Liz Truss faces, that she's got to try and reassure the markets on one hand, but if she does what they want, she's going to upset an awful lot of people who supported her.
Yes, she's now in the very unfortunate position of having managed to upset almost everybody, because clearly lots of the Conservative Party were never on board with the tax-cutting plan that was launched by her and the Chancellor. The Cabinet apparently were not even consulted when he made those announcements. They hadn't even been included in any discussions. They'd gone ahead and they did this. The pair of them, but the two are so inextricably linked. They came in 2010. They are ideological bedfellows. I really think it was as much her budget as his budget. And will it be sufficient to get rid of him if that is indeed what happens? And will she be able to regain control and authority and credibility given where we are now?
I just wondered, David, does a lot of it depend on how Kwasi Kwarteng, if he is going to be, I mean, we're all speculating this is going to happen, we're taking it as gospel, but just if that is going to happen, does a lot of the future depend on how well Kwasi Kwarteng takes it? In fact, in terms of might he sort of fall on his sword and say, it was my decisions, I'm taking responsibility, it wasn't the Prime Minister, it was me, she was merely supporting me, or whether he takes it very badly and says, well, actually, it was nothing to do with me, I was just doing what I was told to do by the Prime Minister. Will that have a big impact on the PM's future?
Exclusive from page of the Express, him doing this interview, what Philip's just said.
Yes, yeah, I'll be getting on the phone as soon as I leave. But no, I think I think you're right, and it's hard to predict actually how he will take it. I think it's absolutely true to say that this was as much Liz Truss's mini budget and financial and economic policy as it was Kwasi's. So, you know, it's very hard for her to separate herself from it now. In fact, I don't see how she can. And as you know, those words from Chris Chope earlier, I think, are really quite important.
And I've got here, which this is in the Telegraph Today comment piece from Fraser Nelson, what's the worst way forward? And he says here, the worst option is if Miss Truss caves in, gives up on her agenda, increases taxes, and then just staggers on anyway. In doing so, she'll become a pointless and emblem of a Conservative Party drained of ideas and personnel, unable to enact its own agenda. So that's quite damning there. That's if she gives up on her agenda.
And you know, she may remain in office, but clearly not in power, because Conservative MPs are calling the shots. And we saw the beginning of it, didn't we, at party conference, when Michael Gove and Grant Shapps organised very public opposition to the cut to the top rate of tax. And then, of course, the rebels moved on immediately to, well, what else don't we like? Well, we want benefits to be linked to inflation. OK, the government has never said what will happen, but we understand that Liz Truss did want to keep it to real earnings to save a few billion, and it will be, what else don't we like? So they may get rid of...
Salami slicing, you're saying. It's
Exactly.
going to be salami slicing of all our ideas, and it's just going to be anybody who shouts the loudest will have their policy.
Yeah, and the corporation tax, not cut, but not putting it up, was very central to their vision for growth.
It's going to be a difficult press conference for her, isn't it, this afternoon? You wouldn't want to be in her shoes this afternoon. So, but anyway, thank you very much, Catherine, for joining us. David Maddox, thank you very much indeed for joining us throughout the show. We'll be back tomorrow morning.
And we've got a big day tomorrow morning, haven't we?
Oh, we hope so.
Yes, well, we've got John Bercow as well, haven't we?
We hope so. It's a big day today. Who knows what today and tomorrow's going to... What day today and tomorrow's going to bring, we don't know. But anyway, coming up next, it's going to be Alistair Stewart here with GBNews Day. But first, the weather.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather updates. It's a mixed picture this weekend. Sunshine and showers on Saturday. Most of us having a fine day on Sunday until some wet and windy weather arrives late on. It's a messy old pressure pattern as well. Low pressure systems up to the north, wiggling weather fronts down to the south, and more weather fronts in between. Each of these will really just bring a band of showers across the country. In between those bands of showers, we've seen some fine and bright weather through the day today, but I think that most of the rain will tend to peter out this evening. We'll keep some showers going over Wales and the Midlands, and then later in the night some more wet weather will wash across Northern Ireland into parts of Scotland. Ahead of that, it'll turn quite cold with a touch of frost likely across eastern Scotland. Further south, it'll stay fairly mild. A bit of a mishmash there on Saturday morning. Some quite heavy downpours for northern England and southern Scotland initially, but they should ebb away quite smartly, and then we'll see some good spells of sunshine in the east, more